Hey, honey, you ready for a question?
Give it to me.
Okay. We had a question come in from a minister that I think is a really good question, and one that many ministers ask themselves from time to time. I know it was a question you and I talked about many times over our years of local work, but here's the question. When would you say it is time for a minister to consider a move from his present ministry? That's a good one.
Yeah, one that's commonly asked by ministers.
I think every minister asks it multiple times wherever they're living and working. And I think we should say that we're just going to respond in a general way. Obviously, this is a case-by-case response that would be needed to each person that asks it, because it always depends on the situation of the minister and the minister's family. So what are some general tips that you would give, or some of the ones you think about when ministers ask this question? Is it time for us to mosey on down the road?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I think I would say is that it may be time to move when staying would violate your integrity.
Okay, expand on that a little bit
more.
Well,
if, for example, you have to compromise your convictions to stay.
True.
If it puts you in an ethical bind to stay, then you probably need to move on. Mm-hmm. That would be time to move.
You can't violate that.
You can't violate your integrity. You can't violate your convictions, your conscience, your integrity. I think a second tip that I would offer is that it may be time to move when for some reason or another you no longer trust your church's leaders. Now, it could be that
That's a sad one to say.
That's a sad one to say. I guess what we're saying here is that there needs to be a strong bond of trust between the church's leaders and their minister.
It's reciprocal, back and forth.
It needs to be reciprocal. Sometimes things can happen where a minister loses that kind of trust. For example, maybe the leaders made a promise to the minister which they did not keep.
Yeah.
Maybe they were not true to the contract that they had made with him, for example. Mm-hmm. Maybe he felt that over time and time again, they just didn't have his back, that they were not supportive of him. And he may feel like now that he no longer has a relationship with those leaders. That may be
one thing said with one group in the meeting and another thing said in another group in a meeting.
Could be. A third general tip that I might add is that it may be time to move when family needs would be ignored by staying. Can't we say that the family should be the minister's priority?
Absolutely. It is part of the minister's ministry.
Yes, it is part of his ministry. His family is the priority. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that a minister should just move for a bigger paycheck, but there may be times when the minister, in order to provide for his family financially, needs to consider a move.
When they can't even pay all their bills.
That's right. That's right. Like and there may be some other things involved in the health of the family that would require a minister to look elsewhere to serve. Mm-hmm. Not just the money that he's being paid, but some other factors.
Yeah.
So put your family first. And if your family needs are going to be ignored by staying, it might be time to move.
Well, and there might even be demands by the church or the church leadership that could really affect a family. I do think that church leaders are more cognizant of the fact that children need their dad in their world than when you and I were growing up. I remember those times my dad was expected to be gone almost every night of the week, out making calls and Bible studies and all that. And that was a whole lot of time that I was not with him. I think, and I think it was a little better when you and I were raising kids, although there were still a lot of demands on us that took away from some family time. I think it is better now, but I do think it is very important that the leaders of a church support a minister's family in allowing and encouraging the parents to really be a part of those kids' lives and to raise them and nurture them, not to be at every church activity, maybe.
Yeah, good. We've talked about the children.
Yeah.
It also may be time to move if for the sake of the wife, for her health, for her spiritual growth.
Yes.
It may be time to move based on what she needs, not just what the children need or what
Yeah.
the family in general needs.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think being a minister's wife is a difficult role.
No doubt.
That's and there can be a real dichotomy going on with the minister and his spouse, and how they are living and working in a situation that could be completely opposite.
Sure.
And sometimes that perspective is opposite when they're thinking about moving. One may be thriving and the other one is not.
True.
And how to get them on the same page before a move or a decision is made to leave or to stay. And that is so important. We can't encourage that enough for husbands and wives to make sure they're on the same page with any transition, whether it's staying or moving.
Of course.
But, sometimes there's this mantra given that can shame one or the other into a position that this is what we're supposed to do, or God's calling us to do that, because I don't believe God calls one part of a marriage and not the other. I've seen that sometimes with missionaries where one may feel called to the mission field and the other one not. That discrepancy really must be given, you have to give attention to that, and you may need to have some mentors you sit with, or even some counseling to work through some of that. But if you don't, all of that goes with you to the next place. So.
Well, that's a good point, and I'm glad you added that. Let me offer one more tip.
Okay.
For ministers who may be wondering if it's time for them to move. It may be time to move when it's clearly the will of God that you should move to a new field of service.
Okay.
I mean, if you feel a strong sense of calling to move to a new field of service, if you feel like there are some confirming signals, doors opening, if you feel like, maybe your closest friends could be good sounding boards for this. Mm-hmm. Ask them how effective they feel you are in this present location. Again, a minister may feel that he can serve more effectively somewhere else than where he is now. I think those kind of signals might indicate that God is calling a minister to a new field of service. Of course, it's always tough to know what clearly is the will of God in these matters. And it's certainly not clearly the will of God to move just because that other church is offering more pay. I mean, that would not be a signal that, I need to move now.
Yeah.
I think I've heard some preachers say that they felt it was God's will for them to move, when really it was just because of a promise of a higher paycheck.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the will of God.
No.
But I would say that when there are signals, various signals, that this is clearly God's will for me to move, that I can be more effective in this other field of service than I should consider as a minister. I should consider maybe it's time to move.
Well, and that does happen. I mean, there's times we've been in situations where we didn't feel like we'd made the decision. God had gone before us and made all these decisions and opened doors, and we were trying to figure out reasons why we shouldn't do it.
Very true.
Sometimes it is just clear as it can be. Other times, I think it is, you can get a definite no, and that it's just not going to happen. And I think other times it's not as clear. And of course, we're making an assumption that we didn't mention, but we're assuming that the minister's family will be just bathing and digging down deep in prayer through this whole thing. And there will be long times of prayer, days taken off, maybe fasting. I'm sure we'll be involved with that. These friends that you've talked to about the effectiveness of your service, these are people that you can ask if they would be in agreement to spending a season of prayer about this and time for you all, and listen to what they believe God may have revealed to them or shared with them about your decision, or what they were thinking or feeling, if they're people of faith as well, of course. But prayer is obviously what it comes down to.
The whole process needs to be bathed in prayer. Honey, I want to say one more thing before we close this particular segment, and that is that surely one of the most important questions in this whole process, this whole decision-making process, is what would be best for the kingdom?
Yes.
I mean, we're not only to prioritize family.
Family's part of the kingdom.
Family's part of the kingdom. We should prioritize God's work in the world and God's kingdom. And when it's all said and done, what would be best for the kingdom of God?
Yes.
Would it be best for us to stay here and possibly work through the problems that we are now encountering? Maybe problems with someone in the church or with the leaders of the church, but to work through a valley in our experience, in our tenure here. Would it be better for the kingdom for us to stay here and work through whatever difficult moments we're now facing? Or would it be better for the kingdom for us to move on and enter a new field of service?
Right.
I think that's a very important question.
I appreciate
What
that.
is best for the kingdom?
Yeah. We're talking about a real discernment process, no knee-jerky type stuff based on emotions or being upset about something, but a real time of asking God, where, if we've been called into his kingdom, then what is our role and where do we need to be to fulfill his mission here on earth?
Right.
And that this is an important question for all of us to ask, but especially full-time workers that are trying to figure this thing out, because it's not always easy.
Good.
Not always easy. Great question.